Craig Downs is executive director of the Haereticus Environmental Laboratory, and he's also chairman of Global Coral Repository. He co-authored the study, and he joins us right now on the show. Craig, thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Dan. Thanks for doing this topic.
Well, thank you very much for looking into it. Explain how really this came about.
This came about 7 or 8 years ago. We were looking at forensically why corals were dying in the Virgin Islands National Park System. And each location where there was a coral reef had some very specific factor or factors causing their death. But in this one area called Trunk Bay, which is a really iconic beach, nothing made sense. We couldn't figure out what kind of pollution was killing off these corals until we heard from a local who gave us the idea that was the sunscreens and sunscreen lotions.
And so you were able to take, I guess, samples of the coral that had died and examine it and find the link specifically that way?
Yep. So we were some of the pathologies associated with the coral were consistent with what we saw in laboratory challenge tests. There were no babies, no juvenile coral recruiting into this area, which means it's pretty much a dead reef. Mm-hmm. And so we measured the amount of sunscreen chemicals in the water there. We found them to be extremely high as 1 part per million in some locations. And this is way above the level of toxicity that can affect juvenile corals. Juvenile corals can be affected by this as low as 62 parts per trillion.
And so you looked at the coral in the Virgin Islands, but also, from what I read, you also did the same out in Hawaii as well?
Yep, we looked at it in Hawaii. We've actually looked at it at a number of other places around the world that has coral reefs, such as Israel and in the Gulf of Aqaba. But in Hawaii, we found also high levels of sunscreens along beaches in Maui and Oahu.
Are those the two areas that seemingly have the highest levels of this infiltration, Hawaii and the Virgin Islands? You obviously mentioned other places as well.
Yeah, for the last 5 years, we've looked at UV sunscreen chemical pollution in other locations, and what we find is throughout the entire Caribbean and along the Central American Isthmus, Mexico, Costa Rica, Honduras, as far as Barbados, we find sunscreens, specifically oxybenzone, in the waters over coral reefs, and that's because this is where tourists go to swim.
Sure. And this oxybenzone is part of pretty much a majority of sunscreens. Can you explain what it is and what it actually does within the process of the sunscreen itself?
Sure. So oxybenzone is called a chemical sunscreen. It's a hydrocarbon-based sunscreen that absorbs predominantly in the UVB region and a little bit in the UVA region. Mm-hmm. So it absorbs sunlight and then will emit that energy as heat. So it protects you, if you're wearing it, from UVA, UVB radiation. And it's in about 4 or 5 years ago, I would say it would be found in 70% of the commercial sunscreen products were out there, at least the ones I saw at beaches and coral reefs. But we have seen in the last 3 years a market reformulation of sunscreen products. Their manufacturers seem to be removing oxybenzone from their formulations and replacing it with other chemicals such as avobenzone. Mm-hmm.
So is there something that can be done to are there better options for having that particular chemical within these